Vietnam, long considered a secondary player on the international stage, now aims to become a middle power by 2045. This trajectory is based on a nuanced policy, strengthened regional integration, deep economic reforms, and a gradual modernization of its defense capabilities. Remember, I made a video several years ago about Vietnamese geopolitics and its relationship with China and the United States. Vietnam is navigating both literally and figuratively between different waters, trying to benefit from it. In 2025, this ambitious project continues and faces major internal and external challenges, requiring the single ruling party to strike a delicate balance between pragmatism and sovereignty. So where does Vietnam stand in 2025? What about its successes, its failures, growth, the Communist Party, rivalry, military modernization, and alliance strategies? Welcome to Terra Bellum. In recent history, Vietnam has always sought to balance its relations between the major powers, China and the United States. However, Hanoi is now focusing on increased cooperation with its ASEAN neighbors to strengthen its regional position. In February 2025, Vietnam and Indonesia, for example, elevated their bilateral relations to the level of a comprehensive strategic partnership, a symbolic and concrete gesture that goes beyond mere diplomatic statements. This partnership aims to deepen economic cooperation, facilitate trade and investment, and strengthen collaboration in the fields of defense and intelligence. This move is all the more notable since the two countries have long had territorial disputes, particularly over fishing rights and maritime borders in the South China Sea. The ratification in April 2025 of an agreement that defines their boundaries after more than a decade of negotiations demonstrates a very strong political will to move beyond historical disputes and build pragmatic cooperation. Beyond Indonesia, Vietnam has also strengthened its relations with Singapore and Malaysia, signing similar agreements aimed at deepening economic and security cooperation. These initiatives illustrate a clear strategy here, building a strong network of partnerships within ASEAN to strengthen its position as a key regional player, especially in relation to China. Since joining ASEAN in 1995, Vietnam has played a leading role in the economic and political integration of the organization. In particular, it supported the creation of the ASEAN Economic Community, the AECC, in 2015, which simply aims to create a single market among the members. Today, Hanoi intends to go even further by taking on a leadership role in defining the strategic priorities of this organization. In 2025, Vietnam will also chair the ASEAN Regional Forum and is preparing to host the ASEAN Summit very soon, where crucial issues such as maritime security, digital transformation, and energy transition will be addressed. This brings us back to the goal of becoming a key player in managing regional balances by playing the role of mediator and facilitator in a context marked by rising tensions between the two major powers, China and the United States. And Vietnam did not choose this moment by chance. It has experienced sustained economic growth since the Doi Moi reforms, launched in 1986. In 2023, its GDP was about $410 billion, with an average annual growth of 6 to 7% over the past decade. GDP per capita stands at about $4,600, a figure that has increased significantly but still remains lower than that of some neighbors like Malaysia and, of course, Singapore. This growth is largely driven by exports, especially in the electronics, textile, and agriculture sectors. Vietnam has become a global manufacturing hub, attracting massive foreign direct investment with an annual flow of about $20 billion in 2024. Major investors include South Korea, Japan, and the United States. Despite these successes, Vietnam faces several structural challenges that hinder its move up the commercial value chain. The country is still largely confined to low value-added segments, particularly in textiles and electronic assembly. The share of high-tech sectors in exports remains below 15%. Moreover, the digital sector and research and development are struggling to take off, with R&D spending representing only 0.5% of GDP compared to, for example, 2 to 2.5% in South Korea. Also, socioeconomic disparities are still significant. In 2024, nearly 30% of the rural population still lives below the national poverty line, while major cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are experiencing rapid growth, but also face problems with congestion and pollution. Finally, the Mekong Delta, a key agricultural area, is threatened by rising sea levels and soil salinization, which could jeopardize the country's food security. In response to these challenges, the Vietnamese government launched ambitious reforms in 2024 and 2025. Prime Minister Tho Thalam initiated the elimination of 5 ministries, merged several state commissions, and cut 100,000 jobs in the public sector. Remember that on paper, Vietnam is communist. All of this is to streamline the administration and improve its efficiency, with reforms aimed at creating a more favorable environment for investment and innovation, which is a prerequisite for the country's economic transformation. An evolving model of communism, you could say, similar to its Chinese neighbor, which we already saw in a previous video. And speaking of China, it remains Vietnam's main trading partner, with bilateral trade volume surpassing $260 billion in 2024, according to official data. It's a record figure that confirms the crucial importance of China in the Vietnamese economy. This relationship is part of regional agreements like the RCEP and the CFTA, which facilitate trade flows. This economic interdependence coexists with a marked geopolitical rivalry, especially in the South China Sea, called the East Sea by the Vietnamese. To reduce its dependence on China, Vietnam has therefore actively developed its relations with other major economic and military powers. This is how the United States became Vietnam's second largest trading partner in 2024, with bilateral trade exceeding $130 billion, including about $119 billion in Vietnamese exports to the United States. I'm giving a little nod to the video about American tariffs. This economic partnership is accompanied by growing security cooperation in maritime surveillance and the defense of freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Furthermore, Vietnam maintains strong ties with the European Union, which accounted for a trade volume of nearly $68 billion in 2024, with a Vietnamese trade surplus, of course, of more than 35 billion euros. The European Union is a key partner in the electronics, textile, and agri-food sectors, strengthened by the EVFTA free trade agreement. In 2025, Hanoi signed strategic partnerships with several European countries, including the Czech Republic and Switzerland, including in innovative sectors such as renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and green infrastructure, always aiming to diversify and acquire more technologically advanced production capabilities. Finally, Japan and South Korea play an important role and are positioned behind China and the United States. Japan is a key partner in industrial development, economic modernization, and security cooperation, while South Korea mainly plays the role of a major investor. Vietnam, aware of its complex relationship with China, adopts a cautious stance. It expresses its maritime claims through diplomatic protests and modernizes its defense capabilities, but while avoiding direct military escalation. This strengthening has resulted in the acquisition of modern offshore patrol vessels equipped with advanced technologies for surveillance, detection, and interception. The goal for Vietnam is to have an increased presence and better responsiveness to foreign incursions, especially Chinese ones, with limited resources. At the same time, the country is relying on coastal defense systems that include anti-ship missile batteries and state-of-the-art radars in order to strengthen the protection of its coastlines and exclusive economic zones. These pieces of equipment improve conventional deterrence capability, which is useful in the context of the East Sea. Vietnam is also preparing to integrate the supersonic BrahMos cruise missile acquired from India. This system, which will be deployed on its Su-30 fighters, as well as on mobile coastal batteries, is a major advancement in terms of range, speed, and accuracy for the Vietnamese military, and will significantly strengthen its maritime strike capabilities. You can see it coming. India, just like the United States, also sees Vietnam as a way to put a little thorn in China's side. Vietnam has also stepped up its regional military cooperation by increasing joint exercises with India, Japan, and Australia. These exercises aim to share skills in maritime surveillance and build up the operational experience of Vietnam's very modest fleet. Vietnam's naval buildup combines modern acquisitions, the development of advanced defense systems, and strengthened regional cooperation, forming a coherent strategy. Vietnam's goal is to make the most of its rivalries with its Chinese neighbor, while remaining focused on protecting its maritime sovereignty and without directly threatening China. Because Vietnam also has its limits, it allocates about 2% of its GDP to defense, which is nearly $8 billion in 2024. Its army has 500,000 active soldiers, but is currently undergoing a comprehensive modernization that is expected to be completed by 2030. The country is diversifying its arms suppliers, gradually moving from dependence on the USSR and Russia, which still account for 60% of its equipment, toward countries like Israel, India, and some European countries. Vietnam also aims to develop a local defense industry, with projects like the VCS-01 Trung Sun missile system and the VUC-2 kamikaze drone, which demonstrate a desire for increased autonomy. Despite these advances, Western armaments are often too expensive for Vietnam's limited budget, and integrating equipment that is too heterogeneous also complicates training and maintenance. The country also does not have sufficient naval air capabilities to maintain a lasting presence beyond its territorial waters, which limits its power projection. Vietnam remains a one-party state, where the Communist Party exercises strict control over society and politics, which could hinder social and economic innovation. However, the current leadership under Tho To Lam favors economic pragmatism, seeking to legitimize power through growth and modernization rather than strict ideology. This approach is therefore not entirely incompatible with an environment conducive to innovation, provided that political reforms accompany economic reforms. With a population of nearly 100 million people, most of whom are under 35 years old, Vietnam enjoys a more than favorable demographic dividend. But on the ground, rapid urban growth also brings challenges in housing, infrastructure, and public services, all of which are challenges the party will have to address. Inequalities remain significant, with poverty still present in rural and mountainous areas, which are often home to ethnic minorities, who make up about 15% of Vietnam's total population. The government has launched social programs to reduce these gaps, but the transition to a more inclusive economy remains the country's major societal challenge during this century. Vietnam is also particularly vulnerable to climate hazards. The Mekong Delta alone accounts for about 50% of the country's rice production, 65% of aquaculture production, and 70% of Vietnam's fruit production. So as you can see, it's a crucial agricultural region that is experiencing increasing soil salinization and rising water temperatures, which pose a long-term threat to crops. The intensive use of fertilizers and pesticides has also degraded the quality of the soil and water. Natural disasters, such as typhoons and floods, are also becoming more frequent and intense. But again, the government has made ecological transition one of its priorities to save this key region, with a goal of net zero emissions by 2050. This brings us back to investments in renewable energy from countries such as Switzerland, the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and Germany, as well as international partnerships for sustainable resource management. Nevertheless, reconciling rapid economic development with environmental protection remains a complex challenge, even though Vietnam has already understood the importance of protecting its assets, but always with a focus on balance. If we could define Vietnam in two words, it would be pragmatism and balance. Vietnam is approaching 2025 with one of the most dynamic growth rates in Asia, if not the world, aiming for a GDP increase of 7 to 8% controlled inflation, around 4 to 4.5%, and a GDP per capita that should approach $4,900. This ambitious trajectory is based on a rather exceptional openness to trade, administrative reforms, and diversification of its partners, while continuing to modernize its armed forces and its economy. But these successes come with major challenges. The single-party political model, which guarantees stability, will also have to evolve to support innovation and social inclusion. At a crossroads, Vietnam must now combine rapid growth, stability, and sustainable development to leverage its strengths and establish itself as a key player in Southeast Asia. Let me remind you of the simple steps. Like and share this video to shine in society on your networks. It helps us a lot because we depend only on you. Thank you to the YouTube members who contribute to funding this channel. The funds are reinvested in purchasing software licenses, videos, equipment, and so on. Thank you for your loyalty. This was Quentin for Terabellum. See you next time.